Hello everyone, Brian Smith with Vantas Commercial Real Estate. We're outside an office building here to talk to you about the pros and cons of owning office. So one of the pros is that in general, people keep their place of business clean and in good repair, especially when they have clients coming in on a consistent basis. And so office space in general doesn't get beat up and doesn't cost as much when you do have a tenant leave to be able to bring a new tenant in, especially if your build out is a fairly standard type of build out for office that is usable for many different types of tenants. The pro of having a specialty build out is that the current tenant probably won't want to move because they would have to go through another specialty build out in a new location. The downside of having a specialty type of build out is that if the current tenant leaves, you can end up going through quite a bit of expense to get the space ready for your next potential tenant. In general, leases for office space are some of the longer leases in commercial real estate. It's not uncommon to see 3 to 5 year leases and as long as a 10-year lease. A 10-year lease is a long time for a tenant to commit. It gives the landlord quite a bit of stability in having that tenant paying rent for 10 years. The plus side for a tenant would be they know where their business is going to be operating out of and potentially lock in the rent rate for a full 10 years as well. Now, one of the advantages of owning office, or one of the pros of owning office, is that you will see rent rates increase over time. Now, for Class A office, you can see rent rates even going up from 1 year to the next, where you've got an escalator built into the lease. Definitely, you see increasing rent rates when a lease renews, and you have the option to be able to build those renewals into your initial lease or negotiate them when the lease runs out. One other thing that can come into play for owning office is if you're proud of the office building that you own. There is some pride in ownership when you feel like the office is looking good and the building is looking good, the property is looking good, and that also can draw tenants in as well, where they come up to the building, drive up and say, you know what, I can see us operating our business out of this space. I really like how this building looks. It can be a motivator. Now, some of the cons to owning office. There can be quite a barrier of entry for purchasing your first office building. It's not uncommon for an office building to cost $500,000, $500,000. And many times that might be a single tenant office building. The downside of a single tenant property is that you're either 100% occupied or 0%. You either have your full rent check coming in each month or you have nothing. And so getting into owning office can be a little riskier if you're buying a small office building that only houses one tenant. Otherwise, if you're buying a larger office building that houses multiple tenants, it can cost quite a lot more, and it takes a lot more capital to get into that opportunity. Another downside to office is there's usually a 9 to 11% vacancy rate in the Sioux Falls area in general on office properties, and so you can end up competing with many other landlords to try to fill your space once it becomes vacant. Another thing is when we're looking at the length of leases, we talked about, 3 to 5 years, maybe even as long as 10 years, you can have a company that would love to be in your office. They would love to lease space from you, but they may have 2 or 3 years left on their lease when your space becomes vacant and available for them. And obviously, as a landlord, you don't want to wait for their lease to get finished up in order to bring them in as a tenant. And so, you can end up with longer vacancy time frames waiting for that right tenant to come along and lease up the space. Class C types of office can get beat up when you're starting off with a more dated or a building that is in more need of updating or maintenance, in more disrepair. Then a tenant has more of an excuse in their mind for beating up the space themselves. On the flip side of it, with Class A office, brand new or recently remodeled type of property, your tenants can have higher expectations out of their landlord. They're paying a higher rent rate, maybe right at the top of what is considered to be the appropriate range for the rent rates that are being paid for office, and so they can have high expectations of you as a landlord fixing anything that goes wrong immediately, or taking care of any small issues that they may have that are inconveniences for them. So in general, those are the pros and cons of owning office in the Sioux Falls area. If you have any questions about that, I'd be happy to discuss it further with you. Brian Smith, Vantas Commercial Real Estate.